If you believe that quiet people often carry the loudest stories, like and subscribe, because this one starts where silence had already won. They said she was just support. The girl in the back corner of every room, typing faster than most people could think, smiling politely when someone forgot her name. No medals, no uniform, no grand introduction. Just Lena Hart, 28 years old, systems analyst, data integration, or whatever vague title people use to mean the one who fixes things when they break. Most never looked twice. But the story didn't start in a conference room, or in Fallujah, or even with her. It began years earlier, in a forgotten nursing home off Route 17, the kind with walls painted the color of waiting. They found the old man in his bed one Sunday morning, peaceful, still. His name tag said C.O.L.M. Davis, R.E.T., the only resident who never complained, never joined bingo, never talked about the war. The nurses said he wasn't much of a soldier anymore, just an old man with stories no one cared to hear. When the orderly packed his things, they found a small wooden shadow box above his bed, sealed shut, dust thick enough to write a lifetime in. No one had ever opened it. Until that day. Inside were medals no one recognized, strange ribbons, foreign campaign marks, and a folded letter yellowed with time. The signature at the bottom stopped the room cold. It was signed by a U.S. general, but the words above it told a different kind of history. A name, L. Hart, and a line that read, "For actions above and beyond the call of duty in the preservation of American lives, in an unrecorded operation, Iraq, 2016. No one in that nursing home knew who she was. But that letter would soon lead someone to a government building 3 states away, where a story long buried under classified layers and polite forgetfulness was about to unravel. Lena didn't know any of this yet. She was sitting in a windowless operations center in Arlington, sipping coffee that tasted like recycled stress. She'd been up since 3 a.m., patching code that no one but her even understood. On paper, she was support staff for a communications security project. In reality, she was the reason the whole system still worked. People called her the patch ghost, the mysterious analyst who could fix an encrypted network in the time it took someone else to find the error log. She didn't talk much, didn't go out after work, and didn't let anyone in. Those who tried usually gave up after her third polite smile. The rumor around the office was that she had no life outside of screens. But if you ever caught her off guard, maybe at 2 a.m., when the lights were low and the servers hummed like a heartbeat, you might have noticed the faint scar just below her collarbone, or the way she sometimes stared at blank monitors like they held memories. She had come to DC 6 years ago, after leaving the military contractor that built some of the earliest tactical uplinks for special forces. She was only 22 then, a prodigy with clearance levels higher than most generals. But something had happened, something that sealed her record under pages of black ink. And every so often, in the quiet between systems checks, she'd open her desk drawer. Inside lay an old challenge coin. Not from her branch, from the Marines, engraved with one phrase. To the one who heard us when no one else could. That morning, a memo hit her inbox. Joint Ops Briefing, 0900. All communications staff required. Lena rolled her eyes. Required. Usually meant fixing PowerPoint issues for people who outranked her by salary, not skill. She shut her laptop, tucked the coin away, and headed to the meeting room. The place was already packed when she walked in. Suits, uniforms, coffee cups sweating on polished wood. She found her usual seat in the back corner, quietly setting up her console. The senior engineers were bickering over encrypted relay times, arguing in acronyms. She tuned them out, fingers tracing the edge of her ID badge. Then the door opened. The chatter died instantly. A Marine colonel entered, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence made even the air stand at attention. He looked like he'd been carved out of discipline itself. His name tag read C.O.L.M. Davis. Lena froze. He shouldn't have been there. Not him. Not that name. He looked around the room, scanning faces like he was searching for a ghost. Then his eyes landed on her. And for a moment, time folded back on itself, to a burning city, a blackout, a radio channel filled with static and screams. But here, in this conference room, no one else knew what he saw. They saw just the quiet woman in the corner, typing code. "Colonel," the director greeted, shaking his hand. "Glad you could join us. We're discussing network redundancy." The colonel didn't answer. His gaze never left her. Lena looked down quickly, but the damage was done. Recognition had already passed between them like lightning between two storm fronts. The rest of the meeting blurred into meaningless words. She barely heard the technical jargon or the coffee orders, because she knew what that look meant. He remembered. And if he remembered, then the past, the one buried under classified seals, the one she'd sworn to never speak of, was about to claw its way back into the light. After the meeting, she tried to leave quickly, but the colonel's voice stopped her. "Miss Hart." She turned slowly. The rest of the room paused. "I need a moment," he said. His tone wasn't a request. She hesitated, then nodded. The others filed out, whispering. When the door closed, he exhaled. "It's been a long time." Lena's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "You shouldn't remember me." He smiled faintly. "Ma'am, there are things a man chooses not to remember. You don't fall into that category." She didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out something small, old, worn, metallic. A challenge coin, identical to the one in her drawer. "I kept it," he said quietly, "because without you, we wouldn't have made it out." Fallujah, 2016. Her jaw tightened. That wasn't supposed to exist. "Maybe not on paper," he said, "but we existed. And so did what you did." She stared at him, not with fear, but with the kind of exhaustion that comes from running from truth too long. Then, from behind the glass walls of the conference room, someone pressed their face against the window. One of the senior staff. They saw the colonel holding the coin, saw her expression, and you could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. They thought she was just support. Until the day a Marine colonel said, "You saved us in Fallujah." And outside that window, a world of people who'd never looked twice at Lena Hart suddenly realized they'd been sitting beside a legend all along. The silence after the colonel's words was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. No one moved. No one breathed. On the other side of the glass wall, the senior analysts and contractors watched through the reflection, their chatter frozen mid-sentence, their coffee halfway to their lips. Lena didn't blink. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. For years, she'd prepared herself for classified reviews, audits, interrogations. But she had never prepared for this, for the moment when a man she'd saved would look at her like she was more myth than human. "You shouldn't have said that," she murmured, her voice quiet but edged with warning. The colonel smiled faintly. "After 30 years in uniform, I've earned the right to thank the people who kept me alive." "You don't understand," she replied, shaking her head. "That operation never existed. Not on record. Not even in whispers." He studied her, his eyes tracing the exhaustion in her face, the tremor in her hand as she gripped her badge. "Maybe not. But we did. We bled. We lost. And we came home because a signal broke through when no one else could hear us." He paused. "I've waited a long time to meet the woman behind that voice." Lena's throat tightened. For a moment, the memories rushed back, the screens flickering red, the sound of garbled distress calls, her fingers flying over code while the world outside burned. She had been 21, a civilian contractor stationed in a temporary comms trailer outside Baghdad. No one had expected a blackout like that. The insurgents had jammed every known frequency, hijacked satellite paths, and isolated entire Marine units behind enemy lines. Hours stretched into desperation. Then, through a fragment of code, one line of corrupted data, Lena had found a pulse, a hidden signal buried beneath the interference. She rerouted the uplink, bounced the transmission through 3 classified satellites, and built a manual relay from scratch. It was reckless, unauthorized, and dangerous, but it worked. For 12 minutes, those Marines had a signal, just long enough for a rescue convoy to find them. Then the line went dead, and the report, when it was written, erased her completely. Automated recovery protocol initiated. That was the line they used. "You weren't supposed to know it was me," Lena said softly. "I didn't," the colonel admitted. "Not until years later. The report came across my desk during my final tour. The technical logs had a name, partial, redacted. But it was enough. I kept looking. Found a piece of code signed with a key, LH_97. Her eyes closed briefly. "That wasn't meant to be found." "Neither was I," he said. "Yet here we are." The door behind them opened. The director stood there, pale, hesitant. "Colonel, Miss Hart, what exactly is this?" Davis turned toward him, his tone even. "A story you should have known." Your systems analyst here didn't just write network patches. She wrote the algorithm that made half your encryption protocols possible. And 6 years ago, she saved an entire unit of Marines by manually breaking through enemy interference, something not even DARPA could replicate. The director's eyes darted between them. That's classified material. How? She was there. Davis interrupted. She's the reason any of us were. The director blinked, flustered. Miss Hart, is that true? Lena's gaze drifted to the floor. It doesn't matter anymore. It's over. But it wasn't. Word spread through the building faster than any encrypted signal. By lunchtime, whispers filled every hallway. The quiet girl from systems. She's the one from Fallujah. By afternoon, the deputy director of operations had requested her file. By evening, security had flagged her clearance for review. And that night, alone in her apartment, Lena sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the challenge coin in her palm. She hadn't wanted any of this. The recognition, the questions, the sudden spotlight. It wasn't supposed to return. The only thing she wanted was the quiet, the one she'd earned through years of forgetting. But memory had a cruel way of knocking when the world was finally silent. A message pinged her secure line. A code sequence she hadn't seen since 2016. Unknown contact. They're reopening Operation Sparrow. Lena froze. That name, Sparrow, wasn't supposed to exist anymore. It was buried, sealed, locked behind black-level clearance. If someone was using that name now, it meant something had been compromised. She typed back before she could stop herself. LH_97. Identify. No reply. Just static. And then, another message, this time, from a government domain she recognized. From Deputy Director Nolan. Subject, urgent, debrief required. 0700 tomorrow. Room 314. Lena's stomach turned. They weren't reopening Operation Sparrow. They were reopening her. The next morning, she walked into the briefing room to find not just the colonel waiting, but 3 men in suits and a woman in uniform she didn't recognize. Ms. Hart, the woman said, sliding a classified folder across the table. We've confirmed an anomaly in the secure network. It matches your old code signature. We need your help. Lena stared at the folder. Old code. Her code. Something, or someone, had resurrected her creation. Her voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. The woman met her eyes. Tell that to whoever's using your encryption key right now. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. But in that cold conference room, a door that had been locked for nearly a decade creaked open again, and the ghost she buried in Fallujah began to stir. Lena took a breath, opened the folder, and saw the first intercepted transmission. It was a distress call, a Marine unit. Same coordinates, same signature. The past wasn't gone. It was calling back. The room was colder than she remembered. Lena sat at the long table, the folder opened before her, a string of coded transmissions flickering on the screen. The sound of her own heartbeat felt louder than the hum of the projectors. Each data line was a ghost, coordinates, frequencies, fragments of encrypted distress calls, and every one of them bore her signature. She hadn't written this code in nearly a decade. She'd buried it, deleted it, sworn it away. Operation Sparrow was never supposed to rise again. It had been her greatest creation and her deepest regret. She looked up at the team assembled around her. Colonel Davis stood near the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The deputy director hovered nearby, anxious, the weight of something bigger than protocol pressing on his shoulders. And across from her, the woman in uniform leaned forward. We traced the source, she said quietly. It's coming from one of our black site servers. Abandoned since 2017. Lena frowned. That's impossible. Those servers were dismantled. They were supposed to be, the colonel replied. His tone carried no judgment, just the kind of exhaustion known only to people who've seen how bureaucracy hides sins. But someone kept one alive. Off the books. The screen blinked again. Another packet. Same signature. Same encryption key. Her encryption key. Lena's breath caught. The sequence wasn't random. It was a beacon. Someone was deliberately sending a distress code wrapped inside her old network shell, knowing she'd be the only one who could read it. She began typing. Fingers steady, eyes locked. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Line by line, she stripped the data apart, decrypting layers of her own past. The message finally unfolded. Text simple, almost pleading. They're trapped. Echo Team. No uplink. Coordinates inside. Heart protocol needed. Davis stepped closer. Heart protocol? Lena's jaw tightened. A failsafe I wrote after Fallujah. It was meant to give stranded teams a one-time ghost uplink, a piggyback through satellite drift frequencies. No one ever knew about it except me. And now someone's using it, the colonel said grimly. Lena's mind raced. Whoever this was, they'd found her hidden code, rebuilt it, and were now trying to signal her through the same methods she once used to save his team. A mirror of the past. Only this time, she wasn't a 21-year-old engineer defying orders. She was the last person alive who could decode her own ghost. She glanced at the coordinates. Her throat went dry. Iraq, near the ruins of Fallujah. The colonel leaned over her shoulder. Same grid. The words hit hard. 10 years, and the ghost had circled back to the beginning. Lena didn't wait for clearance. I can get through, she said, fingers already flying over the keyboard. If someone's there, I can bounce a signal from the old uplink pattern, same as before. The deputy director protested. Miss Hart, that system's unauthorized. Unauthorized saved your Marines once, she snapped. Let's see if it can do it again. No one argued after that. The room came alive with noise, screens lighting up, data flowing, the faint pulse of connection threading through static. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker. A faint green line appeared on her monitor. A heartbeat in the void. She routed the signal manually, overriding outdated safety locks, rerouting power through forgotten channels. The uplink surged, burning hot through dormant servers. Then, a voice broke through. This is Echo Team. Reading you, barely. Whoever this is, thank God. The room froze. Lena leaned closer. Echo Team, this is Hart. Confirm your coordinates. Static crackled. Then, Fallujah sector. Same grid as the old op. We've been down for 72 hours. No evac, no calms. Whoever you are, keep the line open. She looked at Davis. His eyes were wide, filled with something between disbelief and pride. For the next 20 minutes, she guided them out, rerouting signals, masking their location, threading every ounce of power she could through systems that hadn't been touched in years. When the rescue team confirmed contact, she finally exhaled. The room erupted in a mix of relief and disbelief. The deputy director muttered something about commendations. The uniformed officer nodded sharply, and the colonel, he just looked at her. The kind of look that said everything words couldn't. Later, when the room emptied and the lights dimmed, Lena sat alone. The monitors had gone dark again. The ghosts were quiet. Davis stepped beside her. You did it again. She gave a faint smile. I just fixed a broken link. He shook his head. You never just fix things. You save people. She looked at the blank screen. Funny thing about ghosts, she said softly. You can bury them, seal the records, burn the data, but they still find their way back when someone needs saving. He nodded. What happens now? She thought about it for a long moment, then closed the laptop. Now? I disappear again. That's what support does. The colonel reached into his pocket and handed her something. The old challenge coin, its edges worn smooth. Keep it, he said. Not for the past. For the reminder. She held it in her palm, the metal warm from his hand, and finally smiled. For the reminder. As she walked out into the early morning light, the world outside still moved at its usual indifferent pace. People hurried by, unaware that somewhere behind closed doors, a woman with no medals and no title had once again reached through static and saved lives. No news headline would carry her name. No official report would ever mention the code that made the difference. But somewhere, a Marine colonel stood in the silence of an empty room, watching the faint glow of the monitors fade, and whispered, "Thank you, Hart." And this time, the silence that followed didn't feel forgotten. It felt like peace.